get settled here. There we go. Now I'm settled. And we're live. Good. Good morning. And it's time for Bible study. Man, it's amazing how fast the weeks go by, isn't it? They just kind of keep adding up. Well, it'll be Christmas, I guess, before we know it. But we're still in October. And we started a new unit last week entitled Navigating Family Conflict. It's out of the book of Genesis, and it deals with Abram and his descendants. Well, first last week we dealt with Cain and Abel, and then from this point on, it just deals with those who are out of the patriarch Abram. And so today we're going to look at Abram and Lot, and just a kind of a precursor or kind of a reminder to you about this. Here's a little background. Abram, we first hear about him in Genesis. Where are we? Genesis 12 is where we first hear about him, and God calls him out, calls him to leave his home. He's in Ur of the Chaldees, which is off to the east. And God says to him, I'm going to make a covenant with you. We're going to get out. We're going to go. And so he takes his father. He takes his nephew. He takes his wife, who was a half-sister. And he heads out to, stops in the northern parts at the land of Haran. And so he stops at Haran. And of course, that's also his father's name. So we don't know what all the connections are to that or how that is, but that's where he goes. And so, and then he stays there for a while, and then his father dies. And then is when God renews the covenant with him. And so then he begins to travel. Well, they're nomadic people anyway. And so they are shepherds, and they just are used to moving place to place. And so he steps out on faith, and he goes. And at some point, he ends up in Egypt. Matter of fact, there are two accounts of him ending up in Egypt. Scholars disagree. Or I guess they argue on, was it the same account? Was it the same thing? We don't know. The redactors who put the stories of Moses together and threw in their 2 cents along the way, all we can say is that we just believe that it literally must be 2 different accounts that he ended up there because of a famine in the land of Canaan. So he goes to Canaan. That's the land God says, I'm going to give you. I'm going to bless you with descendants that outnumber the stars of the sky, the sand of the sea, and even he's going to say in this passage, the dust of the ground, the dust particles. Now, folks, separating dust particles takes a lot, doesn't it, to count? How would you ever do that? Nah, we don't know, do we? We can kind of wrestle up some dust bunnies and, that kind of thing. But even at that, there's no way to divide that up. So he ends up there. And while he's there in Egypt, God really blesses him. And so he acquires quite a lot of herds, quite a lot of flocks. And that uses both those words not really interchangeably. Herds could be like larger animals, like oxen and cattle, sheep, and goats might be flocks. We don't really know all the facts about that. We're just kind of speculating sometimes along the way to figure out what that really means. And so anyway, they come out of there. They go back up into the land of Canaan when things have settled down. The Canaanites are still there in the land. They go back up there, and then we pick up in this account today where he and Lot, they're okay, but their servants, their herdsmen, the people that are taking care of all their possessions and things. And by the way, they didn't just get herds, they got silver and gold out of Egypt. So God really blessed them there. And so they need to do something because their herdsmen are in conflict with each other. Well, if you've got pretty big flocks and things, and then you come into a place where there's already people there, and now all that does is just, lessen the supply. And so you got to find places to feed them. You got to find places to water them. You've got to find places to take care of them. And so we're going to see where Abram and Lot Abram makes a decision led by the Lord, and then Lot makes a decision, and then they have to live with their decisions. So that's where we pick up. And the title of this, let me make sure I get the right thing here. Title of this is Abram and Lot, Family Rights. And gosh, isn't it something that families can get along until then somebody thinks they've got a right to something that somebody else maybe has. And that's when the conflict comes in. That's when there's discrepancies about it. And remember, this wasn't necessarily between Abram and Lot. This was happening for position, for ways to water and to feed their herds and their flocks. So we're going to start then, Genesis 13, verse 5. Now Lot, who was traveling with Abram, also had flocks, herds, and tents. And these people were nomads. They lived in tents. But the land was unable to support them as long as they stayed together, for they had so many possessions that they could not stay together. And there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land. So Abram said to Lot, "Please, let's not have quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, since we are relatives." And boy, I don't know if I were Lot, I'd be thinking, you know, Lot's father had died before they left Ur, and that's why Abram had taken him with them. And I can't help but think that I'd be thinking I could be back there in the land of what was later the Babylonians or the Chaldees. I could be back there, just a commoner, but now here I am. I came along for the ride, and look what God's done for me. But we never get any picture of Lot understanding this God that had called Abram out. And we just never really see that he has any personal connection or understanding of who God is. Okay, so we begin. Here's the point of this. We need to identify the source of the conflict. And that's what Abram does, isn't it? He identifies the source of the conflict. The conflict is not so much with him and Lot, it's with their herdsmen. And, if you get up in the morning and you say, well, the pasture's getting a little thin, we better move them to another spot. And then you look over the hill and you realize, Abram's already moved. His herdsmen have already moved their people there, or their stuff there. Where are we going to go? Well, we better pick another spot. So you think around a little bit, and then by the next day, they moved them there. So it might get a little bit frustrating after a while. Or you think about, there's a well here. We'll go water them here. There's a spring here. We'll go water them. And you get there, and it's full of somebody else's animals. And so it just, it could be frustrating. I can understand that you might get a little bit irritated or jealous and my thought would be, hey, can we coordinate this? On a Monday, you get to go. On Tuesday, you get to go. But that's hopefully what Abram is trying to get to is, hey, how is there a way that we can work this out? We're going to identify that this is where the conflict is coming, and what can we do to fix it? What can happen to fix it? Then remember that it wasn't just them in the land. The Canaanites were still there. It wasn't until after Moses led the people out of Egypt and Joshua took them across the Jordan into the promised land that God allowed them to conquer the land and claim it as their own. So when you think about all the things that are going on over there in what we would maybe even still refer to as the land of Canaan, it is the promised land that God promised to Abram, who he later named him Abraham, which is more of a plural, saying that you really are going to be the father of all these nations. Out of that, then we see that God had it all under control, and God knew what it was going to take to get them to the place where he needed them to be not just a clan, and not just a family under the patriarchs that we would name as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his descendants, but it would be a nation that as they came out of Egypt, that it would be a people, a group, and then they would come in and conquer the land, and then they could be a nation there. And so just think about that when you read whatever's going on there historically today. By the way, I hope that you realize that what is happening with Israel and their neighbors um, is a part of history. Um, you and I are living through it, but there's going to be a day when they're going to look back and say, however this is resolved or however this is taken care of, it will be significant historically. I believe that's true. Okay, so um, they identify the source of conflict, and how did Abram try to deal with this? Well, first of all, he appealed to he and Lot's relationship, to him and Lot and their relationship together, and I can't help but think that Abram was trying to think, hey, uh, can we kind of match this up together some way, somehow? Um, and so he just didn't want to have quarreling between them. And then he was concerned about the relationship of all their servants, their herdsmen. We don't need any quarreling there either. We just all need to be under control here. And he said, since we are relatives, there's nothing sadder than families who strive against each other. I can't understand that, and I also can't understand when somebody is a part of the family, leaving them out in the cold, to not include them in things. Families should be inclusive in the way they deal with things. That's just my opinion. And so we get a good picture here of how to deal with things, don't we? And then we go to the next section, verses 9 through 11. And in this, the writer of our material says that you need to choose a "you before me" attitude. In other words, be gracious. Yeah, you don't have to fight for every little thing. You don't have to you know um, be so particular in how you divide it or what you do with it. And anything you get in life is a blessing, folks, and so you should see it as such. I mean, it should be seen as something we didn't earn, we didn't deserve, especially when it's like an inheritance or it's like a family connection. Uh, we just need to be at peace about things. So here's what Abram says in verse 9. He says, isn't the whole land before you? In other words, he says to Lot, look, you know, and I'm sure he took him up on a big hill. He said, look, what do you see out here? The whole land is at our disposal. Even though Canaanites lived there, had they really claimed possession of it? Well, maybe so. But God has already promised Abram that he's going to give it to him. And so he says to Lot, here it is, everything you can see. Then he says to him, separate from me. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. In other words, Abram's saying is, you make the call. You go wherever you think you can prosper or where you think is best for you. So in verse 10, Lot looked down and saw the entire plain of the Jordan, as far as Zoar, was well watered everywhere like the Lord's garden and the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, of course, because Lot was in on that situation. And so the Jordan Valley, the Jordanian area, from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, is a very prosperous area, especially when there's rain, especially when it's in the spring and the early part of the summer. Very prosperous, and they really work it well. They utilize it, but by the time it comes August or into September, it's pretty barren and desolate. But the promise is, winter's coming and spring will bring it back again. And so the Jordanian Valley is very rich and very fertile and very profitable. So Lot looks to that way, and then uh, it says it was well watered everywhere, like the Lord's garden in the land of Egypt. Well, you're thinking the land of Egypt along the Nile, of course, because there are parts, especially in the north along the Nile River, where it is just really plush, especially in the right seasons. And so Lot looked out and saw it. And so in verse 11, so Lot chose the entire plain of the Jordan for himself. Uh, that mean other people weren't there? No, there were other people there. But then Lot journeyed eastward and they separated from each other. But as far as he and Abram were concerned, Lot is saying, I'm going to go to the good looking area. You can go wherever. Isn't it interesting that the graciousness of Abram was kind of lost on Lot, wasn't it? Um, I would like to think that I would have said, no, dear uncle, I have been so blessed by being with you. You've taken me in, you've made me like a son, and now I'm like an equal, and I wouldn't have had anything maybe if I hadn't followed along with you and you hadn't blessed me. You choose. It's really up to you. You are the older, and you're the wiser, and you're the one in charge. You do it. You take care of it. Wouldn't that have been the gracious thing to do? Wouldn't that have been maybe even the right thing to do? But I don't think Lot really thought much about that. He was one who thought about Lot. He was concerned about himself and his benefit and what was going to be best for him. After all, Abram did give him the opportunity to choose. And so when you're Abram, if you give him that and he then isn't gracious or isn't understanding, and then he just kind of does whatever, then here you are. You still have to say, okay, then I'll take whatever. And here's the thing, too. I really believe that either way, Abram's faith was such that he knew God was going to take care of him. I mean, after all, God hadn't he? He understood what it was to be blessed, and he understood what it was to be wandering around and be in conflict, or be, he was in Egypt, and God protected him there, even though he lied about his wife to Pharaoh. God had still taken care of him, and God had been good and kind and gracious to him, and so he had no reason but to trust God's promises. Actually, when you made a covenant with God, how would you even think that God's ever going to renege on them? He always is true to his word. So, the two of them made this decision, and I've often heard it said, when you give someone a choice and you are kind of the leader, or you're the one who's doing it, you're the authority, make sure that you like both choices. Make sure that both are favorable to you, because that keeps you from having any animosity when the person may choose what's the best. Make sure that you like it. Give people choices that you're happy with either way, and then you'll be happy no matter what. And that's really, I believe, what Abram did. He said to Lot, you can go to the east, I'll go to the west. I'll go to the west, you can go to the east. Doesn't matter. We're just going to divide up, and then we'll each have no conflict. We'll still be relatives, and things will be good. Okay? Lot saw it as a geographic thing. Abram saw it as a spiritual thing. And that's the difference, isn't it? Sometimes we can resolve conflicts better if we put another person's best interest before ours. And we might think, well, yeah, where does that leave me? Well, it doesn't matter where it leaves you. You know, if you're trusting God, God's going to take care of you. He always will. And so Abram, I believe, was at peace. He was at rest. He could trust God to do whatever. What you think might be right in your eyes may not be the best choice. And so you do need to seek God to know his will. And that's what Abram did. And so he was content with the decision that Lot made. Even though, here's an old kind of Hebrew concept. If you go to the east, you're going to where the sin is. Well, think about where Israel, or think about where that land is. To the west is nothing but the Mesopotamian. Not the Mediterranean Sea. And but if you go to the east, there's the Mesopotamian area, but it's sin. All those people were ungodly. All those people were not, Yahweh, I am God kind of people. And so that was kind of the thought was, well, if he goes to the east, he's going into sin. If he goes to the west, well, he's going for God. And so that was, one of those things that was built into their understanding. So we get then to verse 14. And it says, after Lot separated from him, the Lord said to Abram, look, from the place where you are. So Abram's still on the hill, or still on the plain, still on the mountain where he and Lot kind of divided up. And God said to him, look to the north, look to the south, look to the east, look to the west. For I will give you and your offspring forever all the land that you see. Now, folks, that's a promise God made to them. We're talking 4,000 years ago in that vicinity, roughly. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? That God made that promise, and it's still good. Verse 16, I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust of the earth, and then your offspring could be counted. Good luck there. Verse 17, get up and walk around the land through its length and width, for I will give it to you. So God is saying to him, go scout it out, go look it over. One day it's going to be yours. And then it says, Abram moved his tent and went to live near the oaks of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. The oaks of Mamre is a place where it's also very fertile. It's a place where it's also very lush. Maybe not as big as the Jordanian River Valley, but it's still a good place where Abram could go and he could be, and he could have a good life. And so that's where he went. Hebron, of course, is in the south of the area. And so that's where he went, built his tent, or set his tent, moved his people, and then he built an altar to the Lord there. This is another time where we see him building an altar. Let's see, I have a list here somewhere where he built off altars. He had done so at Shechem. He had done so at Bethel. And now he's built one at Hebron. And the altar was not just a place where he said, okay, here's a great memorial. No, it's a place where he set up stones and he worshiped God and he made sacrifice there. He committed himself to the Lord faithfully in that worship and sacrifice because he took God at his word. God had made statements to him, God had promised him, and he understood that's what that was going to be. Okay, so what can we learn about this? conflict in relationships can be inevitable, can't it? Ellen and I, um, we're family, and we don't agree on everything every day, but um, you deal with conflict, and you learn how to trust it to God, and you find a common ground, you find a common place, and God is the one who is faithful to see us through even the hardest or the most difficult of things, um, confrontations of our life. Um, we trust God, and that's what we have to learn to do. Um, Abram, he didn't live to see his descendants really become prosperous or flourish like God had promised, but it did happen. It took a few generations. He didn't live to see that, but he believed God by faith, that God was faithful and God would do what he said he would do. Um, God did give it to them. So, in all situations, in all places, we are to learn to trust the Lord and then to worship him as he is due. There you have it. Family relations, Next week, we're going to look at family favorites between the family of, well, I didn't look that far, did I? Between Isaac and Rebekah, they have twins. One is Jacob and one is Esau. And those are names you probably know. So, anyway, all right, we're done. God bless y'all. Bye bye.